Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A video number 65. Make sure you keep asking questions. Doesn't matter what they're about. They can be about anything. Just know I don't respond to review requests or Let's Play requests in these videos, but I'll respond to them in the comments. If you're not sure about what you're asking, just remember if you're asking about can you review insert game here or what are your thoughts on insert game here, those are review requests. They are not for Q&As. If you have a specific question about a certain feature of a game or something surrounding it in the news or something like that, that's perfectly acceptable for Q&As, but otherwise don't expect me to cover something like that in a Q&A. Gameplay in the background is of me failing miserably at Tribes of Sin, partly because it fits in really well with the last question of this particular video, but also because it fits in fairly well with the fourth question of this video, even though it's not specifically about this particular genre. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started with a question from Tioshao. I'm much more interested in your opinion of representative democracy. I think bipartisanship, as well as the more obvious disproportional representation of the wealthy in U.S. politics, have created a situation in which the people are essentially given two choices of representatives, and the representatives constantly have a leg up on the represented. Well, it depends on the system that you're using, obviously. With regards to the U.S. system, we use first past the post, and it has created no shortage of problems, and it's pretty much turned the U.S. into a complete oligarchy instead of an actual representative democracy. That's not to say that the idea of representative democracy is problematic in itself, it's just the way it's implemented that can cause massive amounts of problems. And unfortunately, the way that the US system is set up, it just doesn't work all that well. The way our voting system works is first past the post, and that always inevitably results in two major parties and nothing else. And I think we've been in this rut so long that most people don't even realize there's other voting systems that will actually help this out, but they probably just don't even care at that point. You see, a democracy only works really well when your people actually give a crap about it, and if they don't, and they're like the American public, which is mostly extremely apathetic, then it's not like we're actually going to see any real progress in terms of the democracy. And if anything, it's just stagnated for the past at least 40 or so years. And now we're starting to see the repercussions of that, so it's just all kinds of wonderful, right? As for the idea of representative democracy in general, I view it as one of the higher forms of government, simply because there is the opportunity for citizens to be involved in it, and thus it is generally a pretty good way to preserve liberty. Or at least it's one of the better systems for it, I should say. If there were actually a better system out there that still preserves everyone's individual freedoms and still allows them to actually participate in that government, then maybe that would be a better option, but right now there's not really much of a better option for it. I mean, let's face it, we've tried pretty much everything else we can think of, and none of it has worked particularly well. So the success rate of representative democracy at least speaks higher than the success rate of other things. Moving on to a sort of similar question, still politics, by Tom Sawyer. Do you pay attention to American politics, and if so, what do you think about both the upcoming Republican and Democratic Party nominations, candidates involved, and the presidential election? I think it's a complete farce. The fact that people actually consider Donald Trump to be a legitimate candidate for the presidency absolutely horrifies me. Pretty much everyone on the Republican side of things is completely insane, and when you go to the Democratic side, you got Bernie Sanders, who I believe his heart is in the right place, but ultimately he probably won't be able to accomplish all that much even if he does get elected. And you've got Hillary, who also kind of scares me, but it's not in the sense of, oh, she's completely crazy. It's in the sense of, I don't know if she's actually human. If you look at the way she smiles, it is so fake and robotic, it's actually kind of disturbing. But anyway, as far as paying attention goes, I do not pay attention to the shit show that it is. What I do pay attention to is who the candidates are, what their stances on things are, and then when voting time comes around, I consider that. That's about it, really. Everything else is just political theater. Anyway, moving away from politics, which is a welcome change of pace, we have a question from Alexander P. What are your thoughts on the fact that EA has been granted the right by Disney to make all Star Wars games from this point on? Well, if you've seen my video about the beta for Star Wars Battlefront, then you know I think they aren't doing a good job of it right now. Basically, having exclusive access to the Star Wars license gives EA an excuse to pretty much print money with their games. because Star Wars games sell like hotcakes no matter how crappy they are, as evidenced by Battlefront. And of course EA is just going to laugh all the way to the bank, and they're probably never going to actually produce anything of quality, although BioWare, if they ever give them a chance to make a full-on single-player RPG again, might be able to pull something off, considering that Dragon Age Inquisition was actually pretty good despite its problems. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. But right now, the only release we've had from them as far as Star Wars goes is Battlefront, which of course was developed by DICE, who haven't made an actually truly good game since Battlefield 2 back in 2005. And since then, the best they've managed is fairly average, so I don't really anticipate the Battlefront series ever being anywhere near as good as it used to be. And honestly, I wouldn't even expect much other than Battlefront at this point from EA, simply by nature of them only having 3 major studios of note anymore, and those are DICE, BioWare, and Visceral. And while Visceral might be able to pull something off in terms of being an action-adventure game, probably in the vein of something like Uncharted, actually, I don't see much variety coming out of EA's Star Wars games at this point, and frankly, I feel like the license is just going to go to complete waste. Moving on to a question from Nathan L. What's your opinion on the state of AAA RPGs? From what I've seen, there's not a lot to choose from. You can count the relevant ones on, like, one hand. Actually, it's more like less than one hand, but that's beside the point. The only AAA RPGs that I can name from basically 2014 on were Dragon Age Inquisition and The Witcher 3. And that's it. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. AAA RPGs have been effectively supplanted by AAA action-adventure games that are open world and incorporate some light RPG elements like maybe a progression system or something like that, but ultimately aren't RPGs. And so when a AAA RPG does come around, like what CD Projekt Red does, it ends up being incredibly refreshing. But here's the thing. I don't really expect to see RPGs out of the AAA scene anymore. They're not safe. AAA is all about playing things very, very safe. That means action-adventure games, that means sports games, and that means first-person shooters. And not much else. RPGs are actually pretty risky business propositions, so big companies just won't even touch them for the most part, unless they know that they can recoup a lot of profits from that, like, say, BioWare, for example. Dragon Age and Mass Effect have both achieved a large amount of widespread appeal, and that's because they tend to be fairly light on being proper RPGs, but there's still enough of them that I would actually still consider them to be RPGs. But other than that, you really need to look into the indie scene to find where all the actual RPGs are going, and that's where they thrive, really. They're pretty niche games, frankly, and it stands to reason that they would fit well in the niche that has been created for them, instead of trying to branch out into more widespread success. And that's actually where Tribes Ascend comes in, because it's a very niche first-person shooter, even though first-person shooters themselves are actually an extremely popular genre. Tribes is a very niche first-person shooter series, and while it has achieved pretty decent success as a free-to-play game, and it certainly has achieved great success in the past, it has been among a group of FPS gamers that is fairly small compared to the larger group of FPS gamers that are out there, and will feast on things that are AAA games. I don't remotely expect something as niche as Tribes to show up in the mainstream AAA scene. It just wouldn't work. It's way too high speed, it's way too precision oriented, it requires way too much skill on the part of the players to actually hit mainstream. Same thing goes with most RPGs. So, sure, the fact that there aren't all that many of them anymore is a bit disappointing, but look at what we're seeing pop out of the indie scene. As far as the indie RPG scene goes, it's pretty much a renaissance for actual proper role-playing games. So even if the AAA scene has failed us, we're getting it out of the indie scene, and ultimately, I think that's for the better. Last question for this Q&A is from Noir Suede. DW, what is your definition of a niche game? Is it something that covers a subject that not a lot of people know about, for example, the Yakuza series? Well, it's actually pretty simple. My idea of a niche game is really something that is just not going to appeal to a huge audience. It's not going to appeal to the mainstream at all. I go back to Tribes. Again, it's a very niche first-person shooter series because the vast majority of FPS players are not going to be able to actually be competitive in it. And even though I've been playing that series for quite a long time now, I'm still terrible at it. And even with the skill aspect aside, What is there about Tribes that would actually appeal to a mainstream audience? Really not that much. It's an extremely high-speed first-person shooter that requires way too much precision for your average gamer to really be interested in. Frankly, the average video game player is really not that good at them. Generally speaking, they want something that is easy to pick up and play, that doesn't require them to memorize tons of stats or anything like that, doesn't require them to use their brain too horribly much, and they just want to have fun. Niche games appeal to different sensibilities. For example, Tribes is popular among people who are very competitive and who want really high-speed first-person shooter gameplay. A lot of Japanese games are very niche because of their subject matter just not really appealing to Western audiences, for example. Adventure games are rather niche. They don't appeal to a mainstream audience because they require you to use your brain too much and think outside the box a bit more than what most people are comfortable with. On top of that, they're very story-oriented, and your average gamer probably doesn't care all that much about a story in a video game. So I guess you can just boil the question down to, does this appeal to pretty much everybody out there, or is it something that only a very limited audience is really going to be able to get anything out of? If it's something that's for the more limited audience, it's a niche game. If it's something that is for the wide audience, it's not niche. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to understand, I figure. And with that, we come to the conclusion of Q&A 65. Make sure to keep asking questions, folks. I need questions in order to be able to do more Q&As. It's really that simple. So until next time, keep asking questions, and I will catch you guys in later videos.